Okay, I think that this is live. Let me finagle some brilliance on OBS. There, haha, broadcasting from temporary situation while I transition, moving all my stuff. Um, and I'm gonna go travel again pretty soon. So today was kind of a journey related to that, or today's coding journey is related to that. In that, uh, here, let me pull up this image. So I'm kind of just playing with this OBS live stream studio. All right, so this is an image of me trying to transfer files between external hard drives. What happened was my Mac computer on the left there basically has been crapping out for weeks now, just going into or failing to hibernate. And so every time I'd open up that lid, it would crash, which sounds trivial, but if you wait 5 minutes for a boot up time and you close that lid, 5 times a day or more, and you're only working maybe 6 hours maximum on a computer per day uninterrupted, that's a 10 to 20% hit on your productivity. So it's trivial sounding, but it actually can add up. So it's kind of a big deal. And then, part of, a contingency plan, whenever you travel, I recommend, make a cloud backup. But oftentimes when you're working with computers, having a local backup because you can't remember to back up simply everything. And of course, you can use like the vendor specific software, um, which then led to me also trying to re-engage an effort to get a dual boot computer, which let's see if I can pull that up. That looked like this video, which I don't know why, but sometimes when just running Linux in a dual boot, like this is an example of how long it was taking just to shut the thing down. But I mean, sometimes it's like getting onto an Ubuntu instance is it just feels like you have to hack the computer just to get it to go online, which is nuts. And I don't want to reveal some of the things that I did to I think get it working more smoothly because I think I disabled some of the security features to do it. But I mean, my goodness, you kind of are left wondering like, am I doing something terribly wrong? Or I think in this video it's actually in a stuck loop state. um, you wonder, am I doing something terribly wrong, or like, who the hell are these people that are saying that Ubuntu is like the greatest thing? And of course, on the other side, you have like Apple Computer, again, this POS on the left that has like 16 gigabytes of RAM relative to these other two laptops on the table, both have 32, and it's like the cost comparison is nuts, and you're also locked in. So it's like sometimes when you deal with these types of things, especially when you deal with data backups, which is a whole different can of worms, even can be pretty frustrating. And I think that there's pretty good classes of tools that are proprietary. So if you back up things specifically in, I've talked about this maybe before in other media that I shoot, but maybe not live streams. If you back up, let's say GoPro footage in GoPro's cloud, it will work great. If you back up, and in fact, I was actually dismayed to learn Adobe gives you a cloud. They do not let you, or they do not automate you backing up video, which is nuts. Apple has Time Machine, but none of these things, as soon as you need to like do more than, let's say, in terms of Apple, backup like consumer level usage. So like, and of course, I think the Photos app within an Apple ecosystem, winds up being pretty significant. Um, but it is just, let's see if I can get this thing shrunk down. We want this guy back on. So getting, the as soon as you start doing anything more than consumer grade on an Apple, you start really running into like frustrations with, say, for instance, their Time Machine app is just not all that amazing. And so that kind of left me in a position where it's like, I think it's just, I've finally got my dual boot Windows Ubuntu machine. I got the Mac set up, but it kind of leaves me in a state where I'm thinking to myself, like, why would I even bother at all in the future with, using a multi-computer setup? Um, at least one concept I toyed around with, but I think that, you never really want to live stream when you're kind of mid a bunch of other initiatives, especially when it's a painful initiative like synchronizing your data. And it has for a while been, a micro SaaS idea, to basically uh, to create a SaaS that synchronizes your data into a cloud. It's not a terribly hard thing to do. I went down a rabbit hole of exploring with FileZilla, for instance, which is an FTP program, doing some kind of equivalent syncing. So basically, like I thought to myself, it must not be that hard. And in fact, you can search for an SFTP library within Node.js. So it must not be that hard. So I've already written, a library in here, a library of sorts at least. That in other words, so if we go into the ecosystem for SaaSworks, we go into media and we like pop open this media folder, pop open. I mean, you can already see it's a lot of folders, but as soon as you, especially once you get into like icon packs, and I'm storing, all of the font awesome icons, just to, for instance, and there's like four of these icon libraries, it starts to become something that breaks Git, especially once you start syncing like large video files. So I kind of at that point had to invent, the equivalent of you have in the world of Amazon S3, AWS S3 sync is the command, but the problem with this command is that I think that there's some limitations where like you could, be a bash ninja and do like dry run and make sure that everything that's about to sync is what you want, but it's like the audio cut. But what you really want is the ability for multiple machines, to push the latest data. You don't have to go to the level of like, Git's merging, especially if you're operating on binary files like large video files, for instance. But you at least want to be able to sync from multiple different devices. That is the entire purpose of having your data in one place in the cloud. You do get like a secondary benefit of having like an alternate channel of backup. So I found that like AWS S3 Sync, not totally what you want. Within FileZilla, for instance, let's see if I can connect to the machine is probably not online, so it probably will not establish a connection. I'm surprised that it allows that. That's very interesting. So maybe this is probably backed by Amazon's, probably backed by an EBS instance. That's not to be confused with Elastic Beanstalk. So I mean, let's see if I can try to run a silly little test on this. So I mean, in other words, within here, we'll do like foo, right? We'll do foo, and let's go in here. X. Right, so in FileZilla, you can kind of achieve, I believe, let's see. Okay, so now that index file is there. And now we'll call this foobar. You can kind of achieve like a drag and drop version of sync. It will give you this, and you can do overwrite if source, in this case my local host, is newer. So that will kind of achieve like, a multi-machine setup. So if some newer copy exists on the remote, you wouldn't overwrite it, and then you could probably do a bidirectional, download and do the same thing. And that's kind of like a by hand. So I started experimenting in the pane, which is often how I wind up inventing things. Of, chances are usually, I think that's that's often a pretty good cause for, investing some time often into tools that like, yeah, they're effort, but you look at something like this, which is like giving you an amazing head start on SFTP. Um, you know, so I basically looked at this and I thought, all right, because this is the same thing as FileZilla. You could, in theory, just establish a bunch of EC2 instances. Like, for instance, if you look up Mac M1 EC2, you kind of figure out, you can get any kind of, VM that you need on EC2. So rather than like, going back to where's that nightmare of a photo, going back to this nightmare of a photo with like multiple machines, multiple external hard drives, um, it it kind of just in my frustration, I think to myself, I think I hit that point as I think a lot of people in the tech industry, say they get to much earlier than they actually do because they think it'll make them sound smarter or whatever. But I mean, it's like I think I hit my point of being like I could do most everything on a shell prompt. You know, I don't really need a GUI to do a lot of what I'm trying to do. Just give me like one solid computer with a GUI, and then I'll just like shell into. You could have like an EC2 SSH terminal instance open up to every variety of computer that you need to test on, and you then could, which is a separate problem than backing up your data, but then you could, in theory, run some kind of, you could either write a program that synchronizes your file system, or you could have like a folder, like let's say if everything is living in the SassWorks folder, you have a folder above that'd be like SassWorks Mac hyphen M1, um, SassWorks Windows, blah blah blah, and so all of those would be, you would just drag and drop between as you want to synchronize changes. Obviously, in a program like FileZilla, you'd drag and drop, but I think it's perfectly doable to just write file watchers on top of a library like this, and now all of a sudden you have a very interesting and compelling product that kind of functions as a poor man's, if we look at Cloud9 would be a similar product. And I can't really disclose, where else tools like this exist in the industry, but like these kind of tools are like, pretty, this is clearly not what I was looking for, I don't think. That's amazing. Here, we want this one. Cloud9 is basically, you have a poor man's version of what effectively is like a cloud IDE. So everything that you write, now Amazon had this product 5 years ago at least, um, where you're just writing code in your browser and it's as good as, let's say, Visual Code, and then it's just auto updating whatever cloud server you have. So you could achieve the same effect with just file watchers, and these products are really expensive. Microsoft and GitHub now has a similar one. If we look up, I don't know, GitHub Cloud9 equivalent, it'll come up. Code Spaces. So, uh, and look, it even says SSH and VS Code. It's like, great minds think alike, but no, the SSH, SFTP, file watch method is, let's see, they might have an interesting set of ideas in here. Code development. Here we go. So, this is why I live stream, because sometimes when you talk things out, you find um, interesting answers to problems you have even, and hopefully it's creating value for other people, which is probably a decent time to just go back into detail and say, the point of live streaming is to, I think, there's obviously always, when you're shooting video, you're creating some visibility for yourself. But I mean, I think that the goal of live streaming is just to give people insights into how someone that's been writing code for a long time thinks. what uh, what these efforts look like, as you start to bring together many complex systems, and you're not just like writing new application code for the first time, and you're not just like adopting a library to try it out, but more like when you're orchestrating technology after deeply understanding the problem you're trying to solve, which is a whole different set of challenges that often lives behind NDAs at big companies. So I think just giving people that opportunity to look at all those things, hopefully, we find some kind of mutual benefit. And I'm still kind of figuring out a rhythm here of maybe I could pop my this part back open larger. I'm still finding my rhythm here of sharing. I anticipate probably in a week or two, instead of like a dingy dungeon basement, it will be a beach behind me. So that will be fun. And I haven't yet figured out totally my format of shooting video, but I'm sure over time I'll become more organized and that sort of thing. But if there's any kind of question related to anything I'm shooting, I don't anticipate that questions will roll in today, but maybe it's in 3 months or a year. I'm happy to, pay attention to any notifications and try to answer whatever I can. But this is going back to this class of tools of being, kind of hooked into your VM in a live way, and this idea of screw paying Apple. Yeah, they want like $3,000 for one of their, if we like look up, I don't know, MacBook. It's so stupid. Like they want $3,000 for yeah, I don't know, 16 gigabytes of memory right here. And like you don't really need a 16 core GPU. Like yeah, they want like 20 probably 3,000 with tax. It's like I mean, screw that. Like, and obviously it's kind of a bummer that you're gonna then pay Amazon. I don't know what their pricing is. I don't want to dig into that here. It's a bummer to think, now you're stuck paying Amazon, a monthly fee. But you can, in theory, whenever you need those instances, you just flip them on and flip them off, and then you don't pay for it. You pay for, I guess, maybe the EVS instance, which is going to be just a super trivial amount of money. So that's that category of problem. You definitely don't have to go to that level, but I think it's interesting for developers to understand that category of tools exists out there. I think unfortunately, there might be some interesting benefits worth checking out with a free tool like this. This could be potentially a game-changing type of thing. Because especially if you're running like a one person startup, or you're not operating a very complicated, even if you're just operating in a development environment, and let's say you have multiple boxes that you need to talk to, being able to have obviously you ideally want everything to be just seamlessly automated and running some kind of CI CD type of environment. um, but I think, as I've discussed in earlier live streams, it's like you always search for ways to build. You always. I'm not going to say you always need backdoors. You certainly don't want that in a big, multi-user, multi-million-dollar production system. But oftentimes it ends up being that anyway. And I think you always want to give yourself options about how to do things. As much as you can, at least in a development environment. So I think that this gives you a good option to, effectively operate a development environment as though it's on your local box. So let's read this a little bit. Yeah, I would assume this might be just built into VS Code, which is sick. How I don't know about it, it's different thing. That's pretty dope. Yeah, so this is it kind of makes you wonder like what do you what do you not get out of this that you get out of code spaces? It's almost like code spaces because this is obviously these are both by Microsoft. So this is pretty dope. I don't want to really go through this today, but I think that kind of led me to the backlog of just pushing code that um, that needs to just get kind of up to date on Git and let's see where we're at on time. Um, we are at 21 minutes, so we'll give us a good 30 minutes. Um, I wanted to get to other things, in particularly I think last live stream left off with some WordPress stuff, but this is more just like house cleaning to do more with my current logistics. Dealing with trying to get stuff off of this box, which it's still functional, but like the keyboard's broken, and it's not that this laptop's falling apart. It's just I don't know. It kind of is. So I think I just wanted to kind of start fresh in a way, not like totally, but anyway. So I thought that left me and brought me to kind of a rabbit hole today, which would be interesting to talk about. Let's see where this is at. So I was debugging. So there's this module for all kinds of things DNS. So mostly this class. This is something I actually paid somebody else to work on, and he's overall, and I think that's a good topic to talk about in a live stream. He delivered a very satisfactory quality of work, but I think that it's a whole different experience when you're kind of managing outputs from other people, and you don't have the time already and that's why you're paying someone else to do it. I think in this case, I just didn't want to clutter my head with DNS stuff. He did a satisfactory job, 100%. But it's kind of those funny moments where you go in and you see like he coded this, um, and we'll dig into it in a second. But he coded this basically this giant helpers file, which almost makes it look like he had this assumption. All right, so if there's this find certificate function in here, and then we go to certificate manager, it's not in there. It's almost like I'm still picking this apart. He basically shoved a lot of duplicate functionality into this helpers file, which is only meant for testing. And no, this is something I just coded today. It's kind of like he must have done it thinking, let's see if we can find this. CloudFront. Create. This is probably a similar thing. Odd. He like so this this is the value I saw and I was like, all right, I'll flip on the live stream because I think that there's value for anybody when it comes to like working not just like in a team in a work environment, but when you're specifically trying to like manage outputs from people. I think with this particular module, and not every contractor I hired out to, a lot of people will just like yes you, and meaning that they'll just say yes they can do the job, and you'll get varying, kind of outputs that result from that if you say yes in exchange to them and give them money. This guy actually coded things within kind of the code standards I'd laid out. You can put like swim lanes in or bumper lanes to use a bowling reference of like ESLint in this case. Uh, so he definitely did code things to that standard, but I started to like see these tests break down, and I was like, I couldn't figure out what was going on until I realized he's like making all these calls out to this like helpers class, which is like it just by and large looks like a crap ton of duplicate code. So that's kind of currently where the effort's at to like get these tests working again and um, not like totally fix what's broken. It's not necessarily that badly broken, but for instance, he has this like put bucket website, and pretty sure that's already here. So I don't know if his interface is the same or what the what the heck. Okay. What else that's going on? Public object. I don't know what his process was. Good guy though. We like him. Bucket. File. He might have. So what the underlying tools that I'm working with here do a lot of is orchestration, and I'm sure it's useful for a lot of different fields, but you always wind up trying to, in this case, it's like resolving the diff of human behavior, but if you want to have a tightly managed system, you know, and something goes wrong, and sometimes like in the world of let's say DevOps, things can go badly wrong, and so this is what was kind of being bizarre. And then, so he must have had some logic of like, he either didn't know how to orchestrate stuff, was like one possibility, which would be understandable. He came at me with a lot of questions about that. Or the other is that he must have thought, I think it's the first case. It could have been that he thought that he couldn't. It's most likely the first case. And it wasn't obvious to me at first um, that it was the first case. Um, so he most likely, like the other possibility though, is that he must have had some kind of strange idea that he had to test things in isolation. And sometimes people when they write tests, you'll see people like write a crap ton of stubs and fakes and whatever the library tends to call it. But essentially, like the theory of that kind of testing is that you have to like truly unit test. It's kind of like a purist approach to unit testing. So he could have had some like mix of the two, and then what you see is this kind of weirdness of like, I guess back in this file. So like where this specifically hung up, I was like, it was having an error in this function was, and I tried to like drop console messages like, why aren't those showing up? And it turns out he like had this here. He had some like duplicate function. So he might have taken like, let's say if he had 100 iterations of changing stuff at like version 40, he decided to sling this delete distribution into that helpers file. Look how nicely commented this is. See, like this, when I was hiring contractors out, I basically would say to people like, I don't care if you don't write a ton of code, I want you to engineer code. And he commented everything. Like that's what I wanted. So let's see if that fixes this. But my goal after I made this discovery was just finding wherever he's like, I guess inserted these like strange helpers references, and then just double checking that it in fact exists, and that so that's not correct, and that I'm referencing it the correct way. Out front, probably. Wait, wait. It's here. So like, and a small bummer out of it is it's like I wish I would have given him this like feedback. These are all great functions. Wait for what? I have a wait for function. It's cool. Distribution deployed. So I wish I would have, looked at this more carefully, and I would have given him the feedback of like, these functions are great. Don't leave them in a helpers class. Like when you're coding object-oriented stuff, you know, I think it always pays off later. You have quality methods. You can kind of see how like this wound up. Well, I usually alphabetize everything. So the fact that this is at the bottom, I don't know how strictly or not strictly he was alphabetizing, but it's not suspect. It just kind of makes it look like he may have done that at a later time. Distribution. Yep. So yeah, something I will do is just whether it's housekeeping or if in between like iterations of actually writing code, I think it's always good practice to just alphabetize your shit. You will never really lose anything by alphabetizing. So I can't, exhaustively go through and talk about things like working at Google or wherever I got experience from. I mean, I think sometimes where you get learning, it's. I mean, I could not credit these companies. I just don't want to go about violating anything proprietary, but I think it's common enough knowledge. Some of these companies, you're like, why don't you just automate this stuff with like a linting tool? But I think some of the big tech companies, tend to want you to go in by hand to assure code quality, which I think that there's a ton of value to doing that. Um, Sounds right. So it still should be, yeah. I was just trying to do this one test in isolation, and sometimes, unfortunately, when you're clearing up PR backlogs, you can really get into the depths of the rabbit hole. I'm sure outside looking in, it can be pretty. And I should probably talk about what the heck this module is even doing. This is a DNS module responsible for like bringing websites online to DNS. Which for anybody that's not technical watching, why would you watch this? But maybe you're learning. Um, DNS is just like your domain names. And then in addition, certificate managers, making sure that's an AWS service, making sure you have HTTPS, SSL certificates, and then CloudFront is Amazon's weirdness. It's kind of like a CDN, but annoyingly, they don't really seem to let you operate HTTPS unless it's behind CloudFront. And I'm sure there's edge cases where that doesn't apply, but for the most part. So this is those three services in this one unit talking in tandem. Um, and so part of the test suite is basically doing stuff like it's creating an S3 bucket, dumping like a index HTML there, wrapping a CloudFront around it, creating a certificate for the desired domain name, pointing the certificate at CloudFront, and then making sure the request is servable over HTTPS. is like the basic end-to-end type of test that's going on here. Um, so what the frick is going on now? This, all that distribution config. Let's see what we got. Date, delete. I guess. Try running it again. The line numbers of failure just seemed like they weren't accurate. This will probably. Sometimes it happens if you change lines as the thing is running. So this is just saying, screw you, not the deletion failed. So hopefully it's like close. And then, no, we don't want that. We want this one. So fortunately, what that then looks like. And I should also, like, I think I've talked about this type of theme before, where, like, don't over engineer things. And I try to, like, um, I don't know, it's not like a land of significant regret or anything like that. I think, as we could call me a startup, maybe. I don't know if that's a good idea. Um, so basically, because these tests are failing to clean up, they're having these artifacts, which you always want to minimize artifacts in testing. And then obviously, like while my developer was developing this stuff, um, these are all not test related for the most part. ACM, we'll see like a crap ton of certificates that may or may not be cleaned up. So you always want a minification of test artifacts. That's one thing. And then I was going to mention how, um, the extent to which you could do some of this work. Let's see if it's dumping it in a different region, which I may have changed. I added that change today, so it might all be in US East 1. And here they all are. Kind of. Kind of. I don't know. Delete. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it's like you could do this stuff by hand. How would you do this if you were trying to do it on a pinch of a budget? Um, Geez, I mean, couple ways that this normally gets done these days. I think backends these days are often getting done with like a like let's say like lambdas and API gateway, which is like a completely it's not a different stack within Amazon. It's very much like an AWS managed services type of stack, and then Google has their version. So you're building pretty specific to AWS at that point. If you had to do all this stuff, I guess custom, custom. I haven't really explored if you had to do all this stuff, as like you're just running the services. I mean, you're more enterprise, which is kind of what the SaaSworks ecosystem resembles. We've talked about it, of course, in prior. Nope, not that one. Not that one either. Talked about it in prior live streams. The goal being to have, a proxy-based gateway or a gateway that proxies out requests to microservices. Not that one. So kind of looking like this. Um, this would be like kind of that would be your like enterprise strategy, but it costs a lot. So it doesn't answer the question if you're trying to do this stuff on a pinch. I mean, really, like what I see a lot of is like people are either using Lambda and API Gateway, which API Gateway obviously is like it's kind of a managed service that acts as a gateway for you. So it's like instead of Kubernetes or whatever, but then you're kind of running everything as lambdas instead of EC2s, and meaning that you're running things as like this new idea of a cloud function um, versus an actual server, um, which I think the cloud function is way easier to set up than like a container, for instance. Um, I never really bought on to containers because at the point that you have one container, now you just have the equivalent of like an EC2 instance with like a set of in the land of EC2 or AWS, it's called user data, so it's just a bash startup script to install all your stuff. Or you could set up the box one time, and then you could probably like clone that box, or I don't know. Anyway, I'm not trying to ramble too hard, but more I'm just saying like if you were to do this work in a pinch, like I guess you're either using AWS managed services, so you're not even really dealing with DNS, or you're sitting up one time and pointing it at like a managed service gateway. And then really, I guess the only other simple way to do this would be you would have a monolith that you in either case like you would avoid this work having this level of engineering behind it. If you had a monolith and you just point everything at that monolith. So the monolith either fulfills the request there or it proxies it out somewhere else. Um, and then I guess, if it's not that, like you could also just have like a human being just update these CloudFront, certificates, CloudFront distributions, and then ACM certificates every time. Um, you don't have to make everything like super automated and programmable. It's not really necessary. All right, what do we got? This is basically saying screw you, and then this is saying that we need this to be defined. So there. Let's try that. And to some extent as well, what is this? This is a 400 line piece of code. I like when I went through proxying like two live streams ago. I guess to some extent, I have built, during day jobs, I would spend my night hours building out this infrastructure to be super well tested. And the reason is because when I try to do something of significance in a first startup, you would build this really complicated thing and it would be a super stressful experience. And then you would combine that effort with like trying to make money at the same time. And that was just hella painful. And I thought to myself, obviously you benefit by learning by doing stuff like this. You're going to carry, building, building out like an ACM integration, or a CloudFront integration, like you're gonna in the market, you're gonna eat the cost of having to suck on whatever teat, is out there of Netlify or Versal, and they're gonna shove their payment model at you if you can't figure out how to do stuff like this. So if you're in the field of writing software professionally, you are only advantaged in a lot of ways, unless you're like really clever and you're really committed and you want to just buckle down and build something that a consumer loves until you make product, and then you have enough money coming in that you don't have to care what other people think. And that's a minority of people. The vast majority of people, you are incentivized and benefited to engineer things, and then you have as an out, you're going to go back into the market and recycle whatever it is that you engineer. And people aren't always going to buy one to one. And in fact, hiring managers, just like in my case of like, all right, I have some ESLint stuff. I maybe put them through like a very light code test. Hiring managers maybe actually don't even care that much. So it's just waiting for the distribution. Um, but I mean, in general rules of thumb, are there people that invent along the lines of like exploiting that their managers don't have the ability to manage what anybody's doing? Sure. Are there like Machiavellian people out there in the world? Sure. But like, if you're by and large like most people and you're investing in just like some level of honest work. Um, I think it always pays to engineer stuff, and that's not something that's like a lesson you learn. You are born knowing. Um, but I think it uh, kind of comes from you try something, and you could in theory. So for instance, I'm in this mastermind. I don't like that word, but it is what it is. So it's this basically this business group of startups, and I will feature the guy in my group. So he's come up with this listening.io, which is like a small little service, and he basically takes like a Medium article and he turns it into a podcast, which basically means that he's probably, I don't know, I don't want to spill his secret sauces or anything, but it's basically like if you were to go onto like Amazon's machine learning library, like it's not fundamentally hard to, you know, everybody, it's generally known that you can, like, for accessibility reasons, turn text into voice, and that those like text to voice AIs, I guess we could call them, have actually, become more and more natural sounding over the years. I'm sure everybody experiences that every day on like TikTok, for instance. And so he's basically figured out a way to, you know, pipe together existing services, much as you would see like in a hackathon. Um, in terms of you see a lot of ideas that just take, a couple of existing services and then they just wire them up in a novel way. And I think that this is a great type of strategy for a lot of people. Um, as far as I can tell, he might have payments going on in the app, but this is like he's probably just using a couple of different managed services already out there, and then he probably has like a couple databases, and he probably has like one pipeline that maybe like renders an audio file, and then serves that up. So in general, like this is like a pretty. I mean, I don't want to like um, undersell this colleague of mine in this group that I belong to. Like he's probably put a ton of work into it, but the idea is that like you could come up with like a very, let's say, something that you could equivalently prove out in a hackathon weekend. And then if you build that to like a high quality, um, you know, I think that that's a decent approach. And I think the way that I've gone about approaching technology is, let's see what it's doing now. So this is basically saying, let's see. Let's see what it's doing in that helpers. So my approach is kind of generally that I'd rather build the infrastructure. What I learned over time is build the infrastructure and then resell the infrastructure, um, which, you know, both strategies come with trade-offs. If you're using Versal today, that means you're adopting a technology that's come out in the last 2 to 3 years, and that technologies like that often, whether it's like that or the serverless framework, maybe they have a life cycle of 5 years, which means if your stack is composed of like 4 or 5 of those, you're putting yourself into a game where like, yeah, like you'll get product to market quicker, um, and yeah, if it starts making money, like you're benefited, and yeah, like you're also working in something that other people, even in like employment scenarios, are kind of doing, so that you have that kind of an out. But I just think for myself, I'd rather know what the actual answer is. I'd rather code the actual thing. I'd rather work with a stable technology because I think you have a lot more room to create and play that way. What the fuck is this doing? This is saying, it's basically saying this. You should be able to get an error for it, but here, this is the answer probably. really succeeds. Let's see where else this is even getting used. So it's just in this delete distribution function. It's an annoying test to run just because what it when you have, I can just pull up some notes on CloudFront. When you deploy a distribution in Amazon, let's go find it. It takes like 5 minutes, so that test is actually waiting. Opening up this is with the CloudFront. Okay, can we go there? Hopefully we'll get this test to pass, and then I'll probably call it for the day. It'd be really nice to live stream soon. I think I have this other interesting, thing on deck. I just wanted. I mean, this is kind of since I want to try to get out the door and get on with my travels. Um, this is kind of a higher priority, unfortunately. That should not have taken 30 seconds to bootstrap, but who cares? All right, so this is all these things. Let's now disable them. Bummer. Let's see. Disable, I guess. That will take a little bit because then they'll have to deploy disabling them first. Hopefully there's not a crap ton of S3 buckets that shouldn't exist. Yeah, we want that. Just that one, I guess. Maybe that was just created for the test. I don't know. I probably shouldn't mess with the test as it's going. It's 46. Yeah, that was probably just created. Let's see where all this is at. Alright, so it's still. So this is how long CloudFront takes, because I guess if we go to its docs, basically, where is this? It has to deploy, whatever you're caching onto all of its quote unquote like edge locations, which I could go into like macro news and bubble out of, tech in general. Um, but it's like CDN seem accomplishable by, a CDN is maybe closely thought of as like a mesh network. Which anyone watching this, you're welcome to go Google what that means. And a mesh network, probably could achieve um, what you have going on in a CDN because now you're like literally getting data from your neighbor. And I think that's a much more exciting way to talk about web hosting. But here we are. I watched a very interesting podcast today. Um, it was basically uh, Chamath Palihapitiya. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but let's see if you go to Chamath YouTube. Yep, he's basically talking in this talk.
Well, you are. I'm
It's called
out
Venture
because
Capital
I
is a
sold.
Ponzi Scheme. And, my experience, I think Chamath says a lot of controversial things. So I kind of, align with some things he says, but I think that he kind of tends to be so bitingly opinionated. I just find some of what he says to be a little bit distasteful. But he kind of goes into this basically saying that when a company goes to raise venture capital, so we could talk about like Versal, for instance, um, so rarely is it actually based on real economics. It's based on that company then spending 40 cents on the dollar back into Amazon, Facebook, or Google, whether that's ads or infrastructure, and that those funds are all kind of tied into an ecosystem where ultimately they make money based on having like a portfolio built up into big tech. And so he's talking about how what you get out of that is you get a lot of like not real behavior. Um, and let's see what this is doing. Cool. This looks like it's progressing. That's good. So you get out of that like a lot of not real behavior, and um, that was just something that like how was I going to tie that back to the land of code so that I mean it kind of justifies this strategy of mine that it's like on the one hand like you have this choice between should I adopt the latest and greatest framework or on the other hand should I like actually educate myself and like look like we're not going to go to the bottom of like the land of the computer stack and write C code unless you really like get a gain out of doing that like you would with microcontrollers. But on the other hand, like if you go to the far end of technology adoption, what's unfortunately happened in the open source ecosystem is a lot of tools, and I'm not saying that Versal is like this. I mean, I think Versal, well, I mean, we can go check it out. Versal, not the pricing page. If we go to like integrations, they have a crap ton of integrations. How do they do that? So it's kind of like, are these integrations, as would be the case like Zapier, and I can, cite actual real world use cases of people who are like, yeah, I tried Zapier at first, and I realized most of their integrations suck. And so it's like, to what extent are these companies just like pursuing marketing initiatives, and to what extent is it actual engineering and actual, you know, consumer-based economics, meaning that they actually have a customer and it's not just propped up by venture capital. So, I think I don't know that this was the question I sought to answer, but I think when it comes to like why pursue a strategy of developing the infrastructure, I think one of the benefits that you get out of it is, I love his name is Derek that built this listening.io. And in fact, I mean, I think if you wanted to like build something like this, what I would recommend anybody that watches this is like you could go. And by the way, he's also been in Y Combinator, and now he's trying to bootstrap something. And I think he's playing the right, correct Silicon Valley playbook strategy how to do this. And if you wanted to source ideas for this, I mean, you'll see some big names out there like trends.vc who I just don't quite like these guys. Let's see. We don't want that page. No, we want trends. Just give me trends. Maybe it's this. So basically speaking, like you could go to a site like Trends, will try to like sell you on. They're basically like selling themselves as like product owners, and they can give you all kinds of ideas to like build as a startup. And you'll find a lot of people in that group are like these very non-technical people that probably like own a boat in Florida and they have like a plumbing business and they have 200K lying around, don't know what to do with it. Like great. But if you really wanted to like do what Derek did and like build something like this, like what you really ought to do is like go look at like MIT hackathon winners, right? Like or just show up at a hackathon, but you don't even have to do that. You can just do this lazy version of I don't know, give me like last year's MIT hackathon winners, and they'll usually be um, right here. They'll be, you'll be able to just see what people have been doing at hackathons, and see if we find. This is like the entry news. Let's see, hack. It's happening soon. It's already happened. You. This is really laggy. Um, sustainability, entertainment, blah de blah. All right, we want hack MIT winners. Yeah, you can just watch this, and this YouTube video you'll be able to find out.
Y Combinator. Please welcome Y Combinator to the stage.
So, oh, there we go. Team Dare, $150.
Yeah, you'll basically be able to get, some pretty decent product ideas just watching hackathons. And like, I don't know, that's just like, an insider's tip. I've participated in plenty of hackathons myself. Um, and that's how you would get to like how did he come up with this idea? And it's like I didn't arrive at that kind of idea overnight. Like that's from having participated in a dozen hackathons where you kind of realize like that's the industry trying to say like, hey, sweat for free and like maybe we'll give you a job out of it. Or I don't know what the people that participate are thinking they're getting. I mean, I guess I've won prize money out of it before, made interesting connections. There's other reasons to do a hackathon, but when the results are kind of broadcast, in such a way like you just access it on YouTube, you shouldn't have any expectation that your IP is safe and sound. But that's where you'd get ideas of how to do stuff like this. But again, I don't know how when we look at the macro picture of what a guy like Chamath says in regards to like the industry and it being a Ponzi scheme. I think one answer I've kind of come up with recently is it's like, yeah, it's sometimes you just ride on your gut, and I know why I'm building the way I am is because I think that I learned over the long haul. If you want to do complicated, interesting things, you really ought to have good tested infrastructure. And now that test passed, which is good. I want to probably get rid of this message of get CloudFront distribution. Let's get rid of that because that's just a noisy console message. And then we want to probably get rid of this one, that what the fuck message, which we deleted. And cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you can ride with your gut, but I think that the interesting thing out of Chamath's video is kind of a commentary that we're experiencing a lot of layoffs right now in tech, and I have had so many colleagues that will talk to me about gamifying big tech and gamifying corporate jobs and gamifying, looking at levels.fyi. Like it's just the kind of thing that here's a realistic looking salary. Like um 75th percentile. See, like that sounds probably accurate to me. I don't know though. That's pretty funny. That company. Yeah, it seems like realistic, I guess. But like there's so many people out there that are like, "Oh yeah, get rich quick." And I've had so many people that I know have been gamifying big tech and gamifying like working as little as possible, or gamifying multiple jobs. Um, that it's just like it's kind of like in Chamath's commentary in this video, which I recommend checking out. He's kind of basically, you know, saying that this is all kind of just like a sham economy, which is really interesting because you look at like how much work also on the other side of it goes into like doing what's just been done here. But there's this age-old problem in tech, which is that it's impossible to justify getting anybody to pay for these things, which is why you have, for instance, in the games industries, people slaving 70-hour weeks for years for like the same amount of money that you work to get in the internet space. So I mean, you do see these interesting concepts. I was just looking today um, to try to like find. So there's this nodebb.org. I was trying to find a newer version of a forum, and you have a lot of open source projects now. I've noticed will have like on their homepage a pricing, which is like this is a huge amount of money, but then you just go to GitHub, for instance, and it's you just scroll down and the thing is like it's a good new it's a lesser GPL. Like so it's this idea of like but what I'm trying to make a commentary on though is that most of the tech out there these days, like they are starting to charge for all of this work, which is like I think that's great. But I think that you have all kinds of different actors out there in the world, with varying levels of, you know, even if there's a lot of credibility to those venture-backed firms, the extent to which are they actually, um, here, I'll like pop open this a little larger now. Are they actually, um, in a venture-backed firm, like, are they actually pushing real economics, or is it something that is like just chasing growth that is not achievable? And so they're kind of like making up, they're doing more of a marketing effort than an actual like engineering effort. So I don't know. Anyway, we got a test written. That was interesting. I thought that was kind of worth going into. I've got my work cut out for me to, because that's like here. I'll pop the screen back closed again here. So it's like that's the sadly for me. That is one out of, if we go to this guy and I go to my handy microservice, get status. So this will give the get status across all of the services, and it's like a gargantuan number of repos that have active changes right now, which is like never a place you want to be. So it's like I have all of this to get through, unfortunately, and some of them are like they're more like in a prototyping phase, so it's not done to the world, but it's yeah. So I have a little bit of this stuff to get. If I find anything interesting out of this, I'll probably live stream again. But my hope is that the next time I live stream, where I was at and I wanted to share was shoving Vue.js into the WordPress backend. So that will be an interesting adventure. Hopefully coming up here pretty soon. All right, till next time. Take care. Might cut out. Till next time. Take care and cheers.